a brand is how we feel about a product. The reason why we want to pay a little bit extra for that person or that product than something else.
Is your brand struggling to be seen in a crowded marketplace? Are you posting content but no one is seeing it? Well, you're not alone. Many businesses face this exact problem.
Today, we'll reveal essential strategies to help you rise above the noise and make lasting impact.
Our guest today is Anneli Hansson, an award-winning brand strategist that works alongside Chris Do from the Futur.
With over 2 decades of experience crafting powerful brand narratives for major players like Coca-Cola and Levi's,
now, Anneli empowers creatives through her best-selling course Brand Strategy Fundamentals, helping business owners unlock their strategic potential and create meaningful brand experiences.
In this episode, we'll dive into Anneli's insights on the most important elements for building a powerful B2B brand, common misconceptions that can hinder branding success, how to integrate personal branding to convert views into sales.
Stick around, this could be the breakthrough your brand has been waiting for. Don't forget to follow us for the latest insights on B2B YouTube growth right here on the Playstack podcast.
Amazing. Anneli, thank you so much for joining us on the Playstack podcast. It's very exciting. We've been talking about so many people about content creation, but what I feel like you as a brand expert, like branding comes over everything, right? Like you can create content, but if you have no idea and no direction, it feels brandless or people get confused about it. So I'm super excited to talk to you about brand, especially you work alongside Chris, who is kind of in our niche of content creation, like one of the big guys we always look up to. And so would love to hear some of your insights working with him and alongside him, and just also all your expertise. So welcome.
Thank you so much. Thank you for inviting me.
Awesome. Yeah. I kind of want to just dive straight into it and start with a question of something that maybe Mike and I are struggling with a little bit. What is branding?
What is branding? Okay, so first of all, I think we need to understand what a brand is. Okay, so a lot of people, and this is very common, so I don't want to judge anyone, but when I ask what is a brand, or even when I meet a CEO, they point at their logo and say, we need a new brand. So a brand is so much more than a logo and a brand identity. So what I think it's easiest way to say it is that a brand is how we feel about a product or a service or an organization or even a person with personal branding. It's our feelings towards it. It's the reason why we want to pay a little bit extra for that person or that product than something else. So that's the value of a brand. What people say about it, what people feel about it, that is the value of the brand. So branding is really, if we want to work with branding, we're basically trying to shape people's perception about how they think about it, how they feel about it. So we're doing things so we know who we are, we know how we want to be perceived by people, and everything we do to get to that place is branding.
And can you give us some examples of companies with good branding? I mean, there's the obvious examples like Red Bull, maybe Apple as well. But are there any examples, maybe smaller companies that are doing branding really well that maybe we can learn or take a few lessons from?
I think if you look at, we need to separate also what is marketing and what is branding, because people also separate those two things, which is really not good. Even in school, you either study branding, brand identity design, like graphic design as a designer, or you study marketing. It's two different words. We need to understand that these two things are intertwined if we want to build a brand. So for me, it's not just separating and saying who's good at that and who's good at that. If we don't put our brand out there, so people actually know that we exist, which we call brand awareness, then we don't have a brand. So we could technically say, so who's doing good branding? I would ask instead, who is good at building a brand that is valuable for people? So I think that's more the question for me. And there's a lot of people, of course, out there who's good at that. But I think we also need to then break it down to understand the different things when we sell something short term and long term when we do brand marketing, which is actually creating the value. So first we can create a value and knowing that the brand exists. There are a lot of examples that are good at that. But it's not enough because then people know that the brand exists. Then they want to buy it. But then they have the experience of actually buying the product. The product might be a really shitty product. Then it's not a great brand experience. So then they're actually not great at branding. Right? And then it's like, so how is the experience of using the brand, buying the brand? Do we want to buy it again? If we actually really love it, we start recommending it to other people we know. And that's like 92% more effective when someone recommends something than you see it in advertising. It's such a big difference. We call that word of mouth marketing. So if you really love something, you start talking about it and then you become a fan. So that's what we want. So when we ask who's good at branding, we say, who is good on doing that entire customer journey? And the people who know how to do that, how to build a tribe and to get that tribe to talk about them, they're really good at branding. So with smaller brands, it's a little bit difficult to give examples because I'm in Sweden. We all are in different countries and we have different preferences and we know different brands. We have a couple of brands in common, which is often the really big ones. So I would say, of course, a good example is iPhone 16 is out there right now. People are like crazy. It's running it to the store and talking about it, want it. Of course, Apple is like the big guru in how to do branding. But if we break it down, I think, for example, a Swedish brand called OATLY. I don't know if you know about OATLY, the oat drink.
Oh, yes. Yeah,
Do you know?
I know it.
So it's actually, I actually have them here because I talked about them in a talk the
yeah,
other day.
Okay.
Oh, they do amazing billboard campaigns.
Yes. So what's great with them is that they say for messaging, for example, the billboard campaign, they say milk, like milk, but for humans. And that's kind of punchy, like milk, but for humans. Oh, really? What do you mean by that? So, but the reason why they can do this cool packaging where they have all this messaging on it, you know, and they do have really cool campaigns out there, it's because they have a really strong brand strategy as a foundation. They know who they are. They used to be a company that was for lactose intolerant people. I mean, how sexy is that? And then they reposition themselves and now they stand up against a big industry where they think that we should not drink milk from cows. We should drink milk from oat instead. So they choose to stand up for something. They have an enemy. They're super clear in their mission, what they want. They have very clear values. And therefore, the people who believe in what they believe. So when you have that strong foundation, then you can position yourself against a big industry. So they're like the Davids going up against the Goliath. That's the foundation for them even doing this packaging and cool messaging. So that's the importance of having a strategy before you start communicating something, because otherwise you're like all over the place. So I think that's good branding.
Yeah. So you mentioned a few things there, right? Like messaging, goal. Like you have a 6P framework for brand strategy, right? And I'm going to read it off here: purpose, personality, people, planet, positioning, and planning. Like one of the questions that I wanted to ask you is, what are the biggest like pitfalls that people or brands or businesses fall into that avoid them of having strong brands?
I would say there's several things, but one thing that people often do as a mistake is that they don't understand the problem they solve for their audience. Like, so that's one thing. They're very focused on their product, and they develop products because they can develop products, not because the market needs the product. This is one of the success reasons for Apple, I think, with Steve Jobs talked about this a lot. He was critiqued sometimes by engineers in his own company who said, why don't we do this? He said, just because we can do something doesn't mean that we should do something. Should have a focus, always having an ear to the market, listening in to what people really want and need. They can't express that because people don't know what they don't know yet, but they still have a need of something. They could be like a status. It could be belonging. It could solve a specific problem for them. Companies, brands that are really strong, they're good at understanding their target audience. They know, and not only know, they know how to talk about it and do the messaging so it really hits people's heart and they feel something about it and it solves that problem instead of talking inside out. So I think that's one thing, that is, people don't know their audience, their market good enough. If you have a really shitty product, like shit in, shit out, if you have a bad product, nothing can save that. You can try to put makeup on it, brand identity. You can try to, make a great campaign about it. Somewhere people will still buy the product and they will discover that it's a shitty product and they will never buy it again. So everything starts also from having a really good product. So that's also a mistake a lot of people do. So I think those things are things that I see a lot. And then also a third thing is people don't have patience. I mean, all strong brands, they have a consistency in what they do. And when we work with communication, like brand marketing, for example, or brand identity, we need to realize when we start to think it's like, I can't stand seeing this anymore. We're doing the same thing over and over again. This is so boring. That's often when people even start noticing what you're doing, because you're in your own bubble all days. That's the only thing you see. And you need to realize that other people, they see thousands of messages every day. So that consistency of like doing something over and over again and not changing all the time, that's also something that a lot of people have a challenge with.
I can like see myself into that. Like, for example, been trying to post on LinkedIn for almost a year. But it's like, it's slow. Like, even if you do daily, you only see like small margins. But then when you actually talk to certain people, then it's like, I've been following your content for a very long time and it's really helping me out. But that's like, they'll come to your LinkedIn because they find value there, but they don't necessarily engage with you. But it's because that consistency gets there. So I like that a lot.
And I think also pretty much, I'd say most business owners can kind of resonate with that, where it's so easy to kind of get stuck in your own head when you're running your business and you're running your operations, and just getting that outside perspective. It's also one reason why Milan and I do these podcasts, right? Because we talk to experts and we get ideas, and usually, we'll have one of these podcasts, and then the next day, like, I'll go to Milan and it'll be like, oh, we've got a new idea that we came up with in the podcast. So just going back to the 6P framework, because I want to dig a bit deeper here. Can you kind of give a let's say a 30,000 foot overview of the 6Ps?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so first of all, before I even dive into it, I always have a conversation about the business goals and how that will be connected to the brand, because a brand strategy for me is basically a little bit the face of the business strategy. It's like, this is very connected to each other. And so it's really important to know, how is the brand contributing to growing the business? So how are we going to measure success, and what are the goals that you have? So we talk about that first. And I also want to hear, like, where do you see the company and the brand in 5 years, in 10 years? Because then we know the direction where we're actually heading and the ambition like level they have. So I always talk about that first. And then I start from the inside, because it's really important to know so when we talked about goals, it's very natural to go into the vision for the company. So if we talk about the 5-year goal, the 10-year goal, but what is the bigger vision? Like, what is the lighthouse? Like, if we're out on sea and it's fog and we can't see anything, we see a lighthouse. That's basically how it can feel sometimes when we do marketing for a brand. It's like, we don't know what we're doing. Where are we heading? Like, we want to change everything. No, we have the lighthouse there. It's our vision. That's the direction that we're heading towards. Sometimes we need to change tactics in things we do, but we still have the direction. That is the vision. How would the world look like if everything were perfect for us, aiming towards the stars? That's the vision. So we talk about vision. How do we reach that in everyday work? Like, what do we offer is the mission. And then the purpose is like, why did we even start this? Why do we exist? More our origin story. So even when we have that from start, this is a really good foundation for a lot of things we do in communication later, because we want to tell the founder story, the origin story. We want to work with storytelling and messaging. So we need to know those things to be able to even tell that story. So that's the foundation. Values, like what's important for us in this company. And if it's a bigger company, I bring in employees to be part of discussing this, because everything starts from the company culture. We need to understand the culture in the company. So we talk about the values, and then that's the first P. I call it purpose, like all of that is under purpose. It's the inside, the soul, the DNA. Then we talk about personality, and personality is an extension of who we are. It's the same for you guys. Like, you have a personality, but that's an extension of your values. So we need to be clear about, if this is a company, a corporate company, we need to be clear about what they actually have, what personality they have, because we talk about that we don't want to be faceless. I actually want to create a persona, an avatar for the brand, so the brand feels like a person. If the brand would be a person, who would that brand be? How do they talk? How do they show up? What do they like? So I create a brand avatar, brand persona. And then from that, now we know who we are. Then we look outside. That's the third P, is people. So now we need to understand, what is the market we're at? Like, who do we actually serve? What is important for them? What are their wants and dreams? Because sometimes that's even more important for people, what they want, than what they need. So their dreams and their wants, but also their fears and their obstacles and their pain points. We need to understand that. And to be able to understand that, it's not enough to just ask ChatGPT. You need to be out there and talk to real people. ChatGPT is great, but for me, that's a very shallow level, because it gets very generic. It's still a language model. So it will be based on what you have said, how you ask questions before. You want to talk to real people and have a deeper. So a lot of behavior science, that they say, don't be too stuck into just look at data and numbers. Also do 8-10 interviews deeper with people to really go understand beyond what they first say. What is the motivation for them? How are they emotionally connected to this brand, and what's important? We need to understand that. And then, so we know the people. We also know who we compete against, competitors. We look into that and market trends and everything. And now we have kind of a clear picture of, okay, so what are we going to offer? That's the value proposition. And from, we know who we serve, what we offer, we know how to position ourselves in the market. So how do we stand out? How are we different from others? What do we want to be known for? So now we have 5 P's, and the last one, I think it's 5, right? And the last is planning. So planning is important, because if we only have who we are and who we serve, we don't have a plan for actually how to get there. So now it's time to think about, where are we today, the current state, what is our desired future state, and what are we going to do? How are we going to get to the place we want to go? And that could be a long-term plan. What are we focusing on? where are we going to put our money, our budget to actually get to that place? For me, that is strategy. So if we don't have that part, we really don't have a strategy for the brand. And for me, that is one part marketing strategy and one part branding. So I don't talk about, people think that I'm a graphic designer coming from the branding perspective and don't talk about marketing, but I'm a marketing strategist from start. So for me, you need to think about how to create awareness first, and so people know about the brand, and then you can create the experience and the feeling of the brand. So you need to know how to do both. So that is basically the entire framework. And I help people how to do this with exercises, learn how to facilitate, how to take the clients through this, often in 4 different workshops. And we do research. And then we have a really solid foundation that could serve. From that, you can write really good briefs to a brand identity designer, to an advertising, agency, or marketing communication. Anyone who will work with a brand know the foundation, and everyone is on the same track instead of everyone trying to do their own things.
Yeah, I love that you, with the 6P framework, you start with purpose, or you start with the vision, because that's so important. There's no point putting a strategy in place if you don't have a vision, if you don't know where you want to be.
Yes.
But also, like the last P, which is planning, is
Yeah.
the actual actionable steps, which
Yes.
are arguably the most important thing, because as you said, without the actionable steps, nothing's really going to change.
Yeah, I did have, actually, there's one P that I didn't mention, which is planet. And it's because I have a big focus on sustainability, and I had that since 2011. But I think I would change a few things in my framework, where I will actually talk about product instead of planet. And I will put planet probably either under purpose or in people, because it could actually fit in both, because people are also sustainability. Like there's different stakeholders when we talk about the market and people. Like we need to think about the owners, we need to think about the customers, we also need to think about it from a perspective of society and environmental, like the planet. So I think it could fit really well there. Also, when we think about bigger purpose, why do we exist? Our mission should also have some kind of part that it's not about money. It's actually about doing something good for the world. So, but product, I want to include that, because I think if we don't have a great product, we actually just put lipstick on a pig. And I'm not in a business of putting lipstick on pigs. I don't like that, because it will never be a good result in the end. So when I know who the brand is and I know what the market really want, very often actually we have to pause a little bit and to see, is your solution, your product or service, is that really on point? Or do we need to do some adjustments? And I prefer to do that then than to do it after you start marketing yourself.
So it seems that, you've been working with this framework for quite a while, and you found kind of a balance between all these things.
Yeah.
Is there a way we can, let's say, mess up the strategy when focusing too hard on one of the P's or ignoring some of it? Like, how do we find that balance between all of that? Like, because I'm thinking from solopreneurs or personal brands that don't have all the resources and time and knowledge. Like, how do they effectively implement all of that so it doesn't go all over the place?
Yes, the best thing to do is when people come to me and they learn brand strategy and they're like, yeah, I'm going to do it for my own company at the same time. Like, try not to, because there's an expression that David C. Baker, he says that you can't read the label from inside the jar. Like you're inside your own jar and you can't read the label from inside the jar. It's very clever. It's true. Because you can't be a therapist for yourself either. And you don't want to cut your own hair. It's basically the same thing. You're not objective and you can't challenge yourself. You will be stuck in the same thinking. So I'm like, great, help each other out instead. So when they're in my class, I'm like, do strategy on each other. then you help each other, but you also practice at the same time. That works really well. So what do people mess up? Actually, what I also am guilty of a little bit myself is for personal branding, for example. It's really important, the same way as it is for a company. Like you said, we need to know our purpose and vision first. If we don't know who we are and who we want to be perceived by people, which should be who we actually are, otherwise it's really difficult to have a persona that is not you. So you need to know who you are and feel that you know yourself, and then that you can stand up for that. If you don't know that, you will probably start, which I've been doing a lot, wanting to see validation from other people. So instead of validating yourself, you start looking at to see, do people like my posts? How many people engage? Oh, they like that topic and not that topic. That's good to a certain degree. But when they have the power of what you're doing, out of a sudden, you're actually not even talking about and offering the same thing anymore. You just do what you think the market needs. And you show up the way you think people want you to show up. And that could make a lot of people really insecure about who am I and how do people perceive me and what do I even do? So I think it's really important to have a foundation first about why does your company exist? Who are you and how do you want to show up in this world?
Yeah. To be honest, that hits home very close. Where I'll give you an example, right? Like I was talking about my LinkedIn, how I post content trying to attract our ICP or ideal audience. Yet the most engagement and impressions and all of that comes from a different audience that I actually don't want to attract. Now, it does look good on my profile. Like it grows my follower count, and in the back end, it will grow my credibility, although I'm not attracting the right people. So I am, like you said, sometimes you're not always doing the right thing, where I post towards that audience that I know where it will grow my following or my engagement, but it won't attract my ideal audience. What advice would you give there that yes, your purpose is one thing, but if we can't get the traction we want with the purpose we have, like what are the adjustments we can make to make that more successful?
What is most important for you to get to find new clients or to have more followers?
Well, there's a lot of vanity metrics for sure, and I'll use the excuse as well that with a larger following, I'll get the credibility of my ideal audience as well. Because I'm very guilty of that. When I see a profile with a few hundred followers on LinkedIn, it's less credible than seeing someone talking about something with 100,000 followers on LinkedIn.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm just thinking, what about if you would create more content that you actually feel is good for your business and to this a little bit more advanced audience? Don't you think the other people will kind of follow that anyway? Because people often tend to want to have content that is a little bit more advanced. They just don't know it yet because they don't know those things.
Yeah, I mean, in my case, it's like two total opposites. One is the one I hire, and the other ones is the one I want to attract as customers. So it's like two total audiences. So I like it's probably that vanity metric that is like the main issue here, and my ego in this case.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's difficult to say for someone else, but I can say if I had a different mission than I have, because I want to teach at least 1 million creatives how to turn into strategists. So I need to have a lot of followers. But if I had my own agency that I had before, when I had really more like bigger high ticket clients, I would probably not go for the bigger audience. I would go for the right people with a high engagement that actually converts. And I would use that as my marketing because I don't do any paid advertising. So I would use that as my way of building my expertise while also writing emails and articles and do public speaking and publish a book. So I would go become the expert in that industry. It's a little bit different approach than needing to have a lot of 100,000 followers.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah,
how
I
I
think,
see it. But I mean, I think everyone needs to have their own.
yeah. I think it's a very common problem that most business owners that have a following that are posting social media content and trying to kind of increase their organic traffic, I think is a problem that most people come into at some point. Because, like, I have it with my YouTube channel where before, about 6 months ago, a year ago, my audience were primarily students, and I was getting tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of views per video. But then, since pivoting away from study content to align with more of my values, align with the content that I want to create, the views have decreased, but the value per view has increased significantly.
Like, sorry to interrupt, but that's like a great segue in the sense, like, how do you measure that success of your brand? Like, is that purely with your values? Is that like, if we achieve our values and chasing our values, is that like a success factor, or do all the other P's also have an importance in all of that? How do you measure a successful brand identity? Is that a
Okay, so brand identity is one thing, but this is the brand strategy. So the brand identity is how it looks like with the logo and all the systems. But I would say that for me, a brand basically doesn't have any reason to exist if it doesn't help the business to grow. I mean, so of course it's important with values and who we are and everything, but that's not enough. If I have a brand, that is, if people know who I am, my target audience, they know who I am, they're not shopping for the lowest price. They actually want to pay some extra to buy it from me instead of someone else. They have good things to say about me and they recommend me. Then I have a really strong personal brand. If people don't know who I am, they're not willing to pay for my things, then I don't have a brand at all. So it doesn't matter if you have a great vision and mission and values and a really cool logo and brand identity design. If no one knows that you exist, you don't have a brand.
Yeah. So even if you attract the wrong people and it doesn't fit with your goals and values, and then the brand success is not there.
I mean, if people need to know you for the things you want them to know you for, otherwise it's difficult. But there is a flip side to this, and I'm not famous, so I don't know really how this works. But if I look at someone, for example, as Christo, because I can relate to him, he has a lot of followers, and I happen to know that he gets a lot of opportunities because he also have a lot of followers. So if he would do client work right now, a lot of clients want to work with him. They want to hire him for public speaking. They want him to do sponsorship. And that is because he is a voice and an influencer in an industry that is important for them. So we can't say that it's not a good thing to have followers. It is. I also get a lot of companies reaching out to me who want me to do brand strategy for them. I say no 9 out of 10 times, but because I don't do so much client work anymore. But the reason I get those opportunities is because people discover me and know who I am. So of course it's important to have following too. I just don't think we need to be so totally like, we need to know who we are and why we do things and the content you want to share and how you want to teach and educate people and the thought leadership maybe you want to build. And then we need to stick to that, because if we're constantly, someone said it so well to me yesterday, like, because I can be that I look at what other people are doing and I seek validation in the audience, and that's like my weak spot, So she's like, think about it as you're a swimmer, like, and if you're in the leading part and you're swimming, you're not just starting to look what everyone else is doing while you're swimming. You need to be in your lane, like have, focus on where you're going and knowing what you want. And then you just continue to do that. Don't be so influenced by what other people are doing. I think that's important, because when we start to compare to others and we start to get all into this like vanity matrix on just getting high emotions, on getting a lot of likes and engagement, it's kind of a really difficult place to be in, because when people don't like your post, then you feel awful about this. This has been one of my biggest challenges since I started to creating content. I call myself like a validation junkie. It is horrible to be in that place. And even my 2-word brand that Chris helped me create is attention broke her. Not even attention broker. That's my goal, to be an attention broker and help people to get attention. But attention broke her. It's a story to that I'm from a country when it's not accepted to stand out. Everyone in Sweden is very equal, look the same, say the same things. You're not supposed to stand out. You're not supposed to have your own point of view, or, it's not like Americans where you want to be an individual and you praise that and you feel you're special. Here it's more like, don't think you're something special. So for me, wanting to have that attention, loving to be on stage and in the spotlight, has been something that really broke me, and I had to become like everyone else. So now when I'm like seeking attention, seeking validation in people, that's my kryptonite. That's what can really break me, but it's also my strength. It's my superpower, because I know how to get attention. So if I can find that balance, and instead seeing it as my kryptonite, if I can see that as my strength, then I can not just shine myself, I can also help others shine. And that's my goal. So it's interesting to talk about it, because people want to be so damn perfect all the time. I'm just admitting that I am a validation junkie. And it's like, we don't want to be there. We really want to make sure that what we're doing is because we believe in something. We decided what we wanted to go. We know who we serve and how we can solve problems for them, so we can create a lot of value for people. And when we do that, then we will see the result. We just need to focus on giving that value, and the result will come. So don't short term think about those numbers, because it will will kill you.
I like that you put a name on it, validation junkie. I mean, I like the story you attach to it, because it's very powerful. And it's also something like, how do you use that story for your own brand as well? Or how can people or businesses use storytelling to connect people and their audience with their brand?
Yeah, I can give you an example from personal branding and from my own story, is that for me, vulnerability, being vulnerable and raw and transparent and open, that's the foundation of actually connecting with people on a deeper level. Brené Brown talks about this a lot. So being vulnerable is the foundation for trust and connection. That's my core value. That means that when I show up on LinkedIn, for example, I share a lot of things that I struggle with, just like I did now. I'm not perfect. I'm 50. I've been in this industry like 30 years, and I still have a lot of things that I struggle with. And I share that openly. I share my stories with people. And sometimes people reach out to me and are worried for me, that they say, I don't think you should do that, because you will destroy your own brand and you will not get opportunities because you come across as weak. Here is where we need to take stand for something, because if I start listening to them, then I will turn into that validation junkie again. It's like, but what do you then want me to do? I learned now that no, this is my core value, to be vulnerable, to be not I'm perfectly imperfect. That's my brand. I have a lot of imperfections that I actually own, and it's okay. And that's who I am, and that's how I want to build my personal brand. If people have a problem with that, I don't think that's my people. But what I realized, this is the cool part, the more I open up, the more I share stories that comes from a really vulnerable, real place. People on a really high level, we're talking about like CMOs at bigger companies, one energy drink company, for example, and a really big management consultant company, they reach out to me kind of, behind, not so people see, not in the comments. They're lurking in the background. They're sending a DM. They want a conversation with me because they admire my way of being vulnerable and open and write stories like that. And they want to learn how to do it. And they don't really have the courage to do it because they are afraid what people will say about them. So then I think it's so cool that those people don't think I destroy my brand. They actually are attracted to that and they want me to help them with their personal brand. So we need to decide about what's important for me. For me, it's important to show up as myself, being vulnerable, because I struggled with that my entire life. And I wouldn't even be here talking about this way if it wasn't for all the support I got from Christo. He helped me on this personal journey. And he helped me see that what we think is a weakness could actually really be a strength. And we love superheroes that have some, that is not perfect. We don't love perfect people. So imperfection is kind of likable. And I'm imperfect.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, because as a business owner, it can be scary because you're putting your work out there for everyone to see. If you're working at a corporation and you do your work, not like your friends and family don't see your work if you're working in an office job in a corporation. But when you're posting things online, whether it's LinkedIn, whether it's YouTube, whether it's Facebook, whatever, everyone can see, your friends, your family, everyone is probably judging, mostly judging in a good way, but there's always people that are judging negatively. And yeah, I think it's really important to just kind of do your own thing and not be too concerned about the quote unquote haters, because there's always going to be people, like whatever you do online, there's always going to be someone somewhere not liking what you do. It could even be just the way you look or the way you talk, or your values don't match up with their values. It doesn't mean that their values are wrong. It doesn't mean that your values are wrong. It just is a mismatch, and that's okay.
Yeah, and I want to add to that when I work with corporate, there's a lot of fear in wanting to not share things until it's perfect, especially maybe around sustainability, for example. People don't want to say anything because they're so afraid of being canceled, of being accused for a greenwash. So they don't want to say anything. But if we really think about it, it's almost the same thing with a company brand, because if they do a great work, they have a strategy for how they're going to change something in a positive way, and they go out and they communicate to people, to their audience, hey, we're not good at these different things. We know that. We take responsibility, and this is the action we are going to take now to change this. So, hey, please don't hate us. We're aware. This is what we do. We invite you to follow on our journey, and we're going to be transparent about that. When a brand talks like that, out of something that actually gets some personality, we start to feel something about them, and we can't really hate someone who's that honest. But on the other hand, if they will go out and say, oh, this is what we do now, we're so great, da 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 da, people just wait for an opportunity to find one thing that they can accuse them for, and they start to trash talk about them, and they hate on them. It's because they put on like a facade, a persona, the way we do with personal brands, and they show up to be perfect, and people don't want that perfect. So I think that's the thing. Corporate brand thinks that they need to be so polished, and that makes them super boring and faceless.
Yeah. Is there a balance though in how much, like I totally agree with vulnerability, and that should be a thing. Like I'm sometimes even way too open about certain things, um financials, like how we're doing with other like peers, let's say in the business world and stuff like that. But is there online a balance between like vulnerability and professionalism, and like do you see where that line gets drawn?
I think it's important to define what we mean by vulnerability first, because I think a lot of people misunderstand that. They think it's telling everything about everything. Talk about your traumas, talk about your childhood abuse. You don't have to do that. That's not what I mean with vulnerability. Vulnerability for me is to stand up for something, have an opinion about something, share something you might struggle with, when you don't know how the other people will respond to it. So you put yourself out there without knowing how that will be received. So, for example, I did a post yesterday on LinkedIn, but I do this all the time now, so I don't think so much about it. But I just got like aha moment for myself, and it's a little bit embarrassing that I did the same mistake as I teach people how to do. I teach people and then I do the mistake myself. So, but that's vulnerable for me to actually share that. Hey, what an irony! How could I do this mistake myself? But I took it as an opportunity to say, this is how I should have done it instead. And that was a learning opportunity for me, for people who read. And also, I got the opportunity to talk about my upcoming course without doing any advertising for it. So it's kind of a good thing. So that's how I used it a little bit. Like I fall into the trap of talking about the product I have, my bootcamp, and I didn't really address the problem that a lot of creatives have and how it could benefit their career and their business by learning brand strategy. I didn't really talk about the benefits of learning brand strategy. I talked more about the course itself. That is not a good thing of doing marketing. And I fall into it myself instead of addressing I talked about the solution instead of addressing the real problem and why it matters for them to learn this. So I gave some examples and then I asked people like a call to action. So what problems do you solve? For whom do you solve it? What are the benefits? So I'm trying to write content that's that. People could see it and it's like, how could she do that mistake? How can I trust her now? So it's vulnerable in that place. I put myself out there and I say, hey, I did a mistake. I should have done this instead. For me, that's vulnerable. Or to say, oh, I think it's difficult. It's been difficult for me to showing up in person and do things because I always had this complex on my body. I had like eating disorder when I was younger. I struggled with my weight my entire life. I think it's difficult to show up and knowing that I'm not perfect. I'm not this model body that I see on Instagram everywhere. And I'm just like, do I want to do that and have people judge me? Or am I just going to stay home instead? And I shared that with people, and so many people, men and women, reached out to me and like, oh my God, I feel the same way. I didn't know if I wanted to be in front of the camera. I didn't want to be on that conference. I didn't want to go to this meetup. And people feel something about that because then they can relate to me. And then I feel it's not so much about me. It's me helping someone else to take the steps that I already been taken, that is so damn difficult to do, to put ourselves out there. Even for me, start to speak English in public when Swedish is my language. I've been through so many things that's been struggles for me. So now when I did it and it worked and it didn't kill me, I feel like I want to share it with other people so they also get the courage to do those things. So that's vulnerable because people can judge you, of course. But I think it's more valuable for me to be able to tell that story for people who need to hear it than the bullies who would attack me for it.
Fair enough. Yeah, it's all about the relatability, and that gives other people the power to activate them, or to just like, okay, we're not the only ones?
It's all about thinking about the people we help. I think that's the whole thing. Even when people are afraid of building a personal brand, they're afraid of selling, they're afraid of marketing themselves. But if we don't think so much about ourselves, because no one else cares about us so much as we do, everyone is so focused on ourselves. If we think about the people in front of us that we can actually help, you can produce content and do things that will help people go from a place they are to a place where they want to be, because you are the one who helped them to do that transformation. That's amazing. If we can focus on that, we don't have to be so self-centered and focus about everything about ourselves.
Yeah, totally agree. To go a little bit on another note, and to like a more practical side of things around branding, and we discussed this a little bit before. We know that your strengths are like, you're not the expert in video content, but like one of the things that we always, or not always, but very, very often see on YouTube, working with corporations, brands, larger and smaller, personal brands, whatever it is how to, because the face of a brand is very important, right? I mean, people connect with faces, and we say this all the time. Like, Elon Musk has way more followers than any of his businesses or all of his businesses combined. Same with Mark Zuckerberg. He's an amazing example because he went through, let's say, a personal brand remake recently in the last year, and it's like one of the craziest rebrands, let's say, out there. I want to talk a little bit like how people can, or businesses can, use faces, and or if they struggle. I mean, this is very difficult to explain in the sense that not all CEOs and founders want to be the face of the company, but they know that it's important that that the audience can connect to a face. How do you think brands can get around that?
First of all, I do think when it's a startup that the owner, the founder, needs to be the face of a company, not maybe in all marketing, but they need founding, they need to talk to journalists, they need to have their story they're telling, and they need to be able to have that origins like story, the founder story that they're willing to tell people. Otherwise, it will be really difficult. I do think that it's really it's better when you can lead with a personal brand and you have your company brand too, because you want to build your company brand maybe because you want to sell something and you can't sell yourself. So you want to build something that you can sell, but you can still open the door and to lead with your personal brand first. But there is different options that you can do. You can work with other people. Like Nike doesn't have a founder, a front figure, but they work with all these athletes that are there. Red Bull have their Red Bull activists that are their face. So I think that's another way of doing it, that we could work with either famous people or you could work with different creators that could also help you create content. And they might be a little bit more micro influencers where they don't have so many followers maybe, but they have a very engaged followers. And that could also be valuable. So there's a lot of different ways to do it. But I often, when I work with clients, actually convince them about how important it is for the founder to be seen and to be a front figure, because especially in the beginning, investors, they're not investing just in an idea, they invest in people.
Yeah, we're exactly the same with companies that come to us. Like we always, ideally, we want to see the founder on the YouTube channel. We want to see the founder as the host, as opposed to like 2 or 3 people that are circling through each video, because people want to build a relationship, or they want to watch an individual person. They want to build a relationship with that person. Let's say when a company, let's say a company has built quite a big following, and there's the founder that is the face of the company, but let's say they're kind of positioning the company to sell in 2 years' time, in 3 years' time. You could even use like Tesla as an example. Like Elon Musk is the face, and if Elon Musk wanted to, for whatever reason, step away from Tesla, I'd imagine the
Yeah.
stock would plummet. In
Or the
that
opposite
situation,
with Elon right now, we don't even know what he's doing. So maybe it's the opposite. I don't know.
so if you're getting ready to sell a company, but you're still the face, like what kind of actionable steps can that individual, can that founder take?
Yeah. I think it's important to introduce, like, say, for example, I have one that I'm actually going to have a conversation with later today, a software company that works with different creators, content creators. And the founder is the face of the company, but they also have a group of content creators that they work with who have a bigger audience than they have. So they're basically borrowing the trust and the audience and have people they work with. And if you build something like that, it's not connected to one creator. It's probably connected to a group of, and you can change people. It's more about a strategy that those people are influential in this industry and people listen to them. And that's more the strategy than in one specific person. Those people can always be replaced, but it's a strategy of borrowing someone else's audience to get out there. So I think that's what you can do. Like, you don't want everything to be around you if you want to exit. You want to bring in others. You could also bring in others, other profiles in the company. Some people even bring in profiles in the company to actually do this. So there's like not just one superhero, there's a group of superheroes together. Because it gets a little bit sensitive if everything is around. It's fragile to have everything around one person.
Yeah.
Because if that person disappears, what is really the value of the brand then?
Yeah, I think there's, to be honest, like no exact one answer. Like, I did some digging in, especially SaaS businesses. Shopify, for example, they have a YouTube channel called Learn with Shopify. Their strategy there is to attract a very broad audience on building businesses and e-commerce in general, not necessarily on their product. They have, I believe, 3 or 4 different spokespeople, but they're all from the company. So that's personnel. Some within our clientele, they have done similar, where it's like the CMO or the other marketing person. And then another story that I heard is when a founder sells their business, they have an agreement that in the 6 to 12 months after that, that they're still a brand ambassador. So there's like a transition period to that. But this is like this is a topic that no matter what, like it comes up. And now that I like the idea of attracting other people and influencers and micro influencers. But the problem that I see is that it could also be costly. Like, how do you incentivize them? Or how can a smaller business afford something like that? Like to like people with smaller budgets, like how do they get around that? Like,
I mean, everything is about return on investment, and that's the short term. And then you look at how the brand develops and the value of the brand. So you have the brand marketing is one part. It's a long term, more difficult to measure. You can measure how people perceive the brand, but you can really not measure the exactly campaigns you're doing. It's much more difficult. That's long term brand marketing with a lot of storytelling. The performance marketing or direct marketing is really short term, and you measure everything. That's when everything is digital, you can measure everything. So I think when we say that it costs money, we need to compare that to something else. What is the other, what do you do otherwise if you don't do that? A lot of people do classic advertising. And a lot of advertising today on Meta or, different digital platforms are kind of expensive too. So you also need to build brand awareness, and then you need to drive sales. If you only drive sales all the time without building brand awareness, then you will not have as good effect on your short-term marketing. So what I would do is to look into the budget and see how can we kind of change, because you would maybe want to have like 50-50, 50 brand building awareness and the perception of the brand, the value, 50% drive sales. Today, I almost feel like a lot of brands are like 80% driving sales. And long term, that's really hurtful for the brand. So you just kind of squeeze everything you can short term out of it. But you also need to think about, what is the value right now for people for this brand? How much are they willing to pay extra from that commodity? Commodity is like when it's not worth anything more than the product. And building a brand is all about creating more value than the product, than the other commodities. But if you don't build that value, you just ask people to buy all the time. After a while, you kind of squeezed everything out. So it's really important. I see this all the time. So it's really important that you actually think about, okay, so these people that I can work with, maybe they have a part of instead of doing like TV commercials or other things that people often go to, these mainstream things or radio, whatever it is, maybe just think about, maybe they are a really good solution to build brand awareness, because we borrow their stage, we borrow their audience, and then we also drive sales in our own channels. So it's like, it's all, we can't just say that it's if we can't afford it. Yeah, but what else do you do to sell?
Yeah. Like when we think about YouTube and like, I'm thinking, Mike, you work with a lot of sponsors, right?
Yeah.
And there's a few that are doing it really well. Like, you see Squarespace everywhere, you see Notion everywhere, Shopify is pushing really hard. And maybe Mike, you can take over here, is like, part of what they're doing is not to get a direct ROI on like a sales perspective, but more from a branding perspective. Like, Mike, can you maybe explain like how they approach like a negotiation in that? Like, how do they value long-term brand awareness?
Yeah, a lot of it depends on the size of the marketing budget, right? So big companies like Notion, for example, they won't care too much about how many people click on your link and how many people buy their product. They just want their brand everywhere. And Skillshare also did this a couple of years ago. Not so much now; their budgets are a lot smaller now. But 2, 3, 4 years ago, you couldn't. It was almost like you couldn't watch a YouTube video without seeing a Skillshare integration, because they were just like everywhere. I guess it's the same thing like with Coca-Cola, where they're just trying to get their name everywhere. Heineken do it a lot, where you see their billboards everywhere. So it's a different level of branding, a different level of marketing, but at the same time, it's very difficult to measure the ROI, and it's very difficult to measure whether your marketing budget is just being thrown away or whether there is an ROI there.
I think you can see what you can do, because Seth Godin talks a lot about like the difference between performance marketing and brand marketing is that you can't measure brand marketing. And he has a point. You can actually do it, but it's more about, you can measure brand awareness. You can measure what associations people have to the brand. And so you can actually brand preference. You can measure that. So you can measure things, but it is a little bit more tricky. But what I think the psychology behind it that we need to understand is that there's thousands of things that we see every day, and it's impossible for us to see everything. So our brain works a little bit like, if we're interested in something, if we have something top of mind, we will see it everywhere. So for example, if you buy a puppy and you have a sweet puppy at home, you will see a lot of other people with puppies everywhere. A pregnant woman will see other pregnant women everywhere. It's the same thing when we build a brand. So I did an experiment with my husband for a company I work with, and they have a very, very yellow color on all their products. And we went into the store and I asked him to look around everywhere and to tell me what kind of brands he was actually noticing. So we went into the store, I gave him some time, then we went out and then said, what brands did you notice? And then I showed him this brand at home with a couple of other brands. We do the same thing again. We walk into the store and he stops, he looks at the shelf, he's like, oh my God, this entire wall is like yellow. That's the brand you show me at home. I think they just put these products here. They were not here before. And I'm like, yes, they were here before. It's like, how could I miss that? I'm like, because you didn't know about them.
It's the
That
same when you
is-
buy a car and you
Yes,
like a new car, and it's like, oh, suddenly everybody has the same car.
exactly. That is the power of brand awareness, because you want people to have your brand top of mind. You want people to think about that, at least think about the category. So the number one brand in the category always have the important thing to drive the entire interest for the category. So that brand is doing that too. So people need to know about the category. They need to have a top of mind that I want to buy a car right now, but not any car. I think about this car. So if we don't have that, if we don't do that work, the brand marketing, then everything with conversion and driving sale will be extremely expensive, because people don't have it top of mind, so they will not even see it. That's why it's so important to have both.
Amazing. Anneli, I don't want to keep you too long. This has been an amazing conversation, and there's actually so much more that we can dive into. Before we wrap up, I want to ask you, like, if, let's say, because I'm gonna envision myself a startup or people, solopreneurs or smaller businesses, and they're trying to build their personal brand up. What would be the number one tip for you from you for that to be more successful?
I think it's a lot about what kind of company it is. It's like you say, it's like no solution fits all. It's like we need to be aware about, like, what is the goal by even doing this? Like, what do we want to do? Who do we talk to? Be very clear about that. Like, what is the goal doing this? How can we measure? How does success look like for this person? Because otherwise, we don't know if we're going to be happy with the result or not if we don't have anything to measure. So what do they want to accomplish, first of all? And then to be really clear about what is the value for this brand that we're also going to build, because it's not just about the personal brand. That person is who he is or she is already. They already have a personal brand and an identity, because I would say they have a personal brand, because if they're not famous, they don't have a personal brand, but they have a brand identity already, because the brand identity is who they are. So they just have to discover that and be clear about it. They don't have to invent it. But with a company brand, you need to be sure about what is the values here? What do we stand for? What do we stand up for against? Who are we for? Who are we not for? How are we going to show up in our tonality and personality and messaging? You need to know those things, because otherwise it's really difficult to start even creating content. Because what is the voice of the brand? If you don't know that, then it feels like you just like wing it. And I don't think that's a great idea. So that's why it's so important when I say that everyone can learn the foundation of brand strategy. It doesn't mean that you have to become a brand strategist, but if you work with people who want to build their personal brand or their company brand on YouTube, for example, what if you would open the door to strategy first and say, hey, before we even start doing this, I think we should do a half-day workshop where we really just have a discovery session when we talk about your brand, what it stands for, what success looks like for you on YouTube, what's important, how we can work long-term, short-term with your marketing, and what you expect from us. Because if you have those conversations, then you can help them prioritize, and you also know exactly what kind of content they need to have. and also what feels okay for them. How personal do they want to be, or do they want to be personal at all? Like, you need to know those things before you get started. So that's the foundation of how are we going to build this brand, their personal brand, but also the company brand. And that is a brand strategy, and everyone can do that. I had a podcast editor who reached out to me, and if I know how much he charged for each episode, I just felt sad that he didn't offer me from start to have a 4-hour workshop, because I want him to know, why do I even want to do a podcast? Why is it important for me? How do I want people to perceive me? What are the most important topics I want to talk about? And when he edits, what's important for me that people will feel and know about me? How my personality comes across. He could so easily have offered that to me as a starting point. Instead, he was just into the solution of editing my podcast. But he actually did a lot of that work anyway, because he asked me a lot of questions, but he didn't charge for it. I didn't say anything because I was the client. But I want him and you and everyone else who works with this to understand that you know so much about this. So when you have a little bit of a framework and exercises you can do, this is a way of giving more value to your client to help them get clarity and a good foundation before you even start working.
That's a really good tip. Definitely writing that down. Amazing. Anneli, thank you so much for joining us. This is probably one of our longer ones. Like I said, it's been like an overarching topic that we wanted to get to know more. So thank you so much for coming on. Amazing. Thank you so much, and all the best.
Thank you so much, guys. Thank you.